Well, good morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning Coffee with Dr. Childress. Um, Today, I'm going to be discussing resources available from me, through me, to the targeted parent in the family. I am currently operating under Standard 1.05 of the APA Ethics Code relative to ethical violations by other psychologists. 1.04 requires informal notification. Um, that's not appropriate to the situation, or that's occurring as well. But the situation is not resolved through informal notification, which then activates for me 1.05 to take additional actions as appropriate to the situation. And so I've been doing that. Um, Went to the AFCC, told them, went to the APA, told them. And at this point, that additional action involves empowering parents because the mental health system is non responsive. The American Psychological Association is non responsive to the difficulties. And so um, to the difficulties, to the ethical violations in professional psychology. They simply don't care. And so now I'm into a more advanced level of educating parents, empowering parents to be able to protect both themselves from spousal abuse using the child as a weapon, as well as to protect their child from child abuse from a pathological, narcissistic, borderline dark personality parent. Now, typically, the mental health people, the mental health professionals should be supporting you in that with an accurate diagnosis of the child abuse and an accurate diagnosis of a spousal abuse. And we should be doing things to protect the child and protect the spouse who are being abused. But that's not occurring in forensic psychology because you've been given your own special psychologists who are outside the domain of clinical psychology. They are no longer doctors, they are quasi little mini judges, which is extraordinarily problematic for the profession of doctors. We're not judges, we're doctors, and we have an obligation to do no harm, and they are doing harm. It was a risk management response back in the 1980s to how dangerous the narcissistic borderline dark personality pathology is to the professionals. So we took a risk management response of giving you your own special psychologists. We call them forensic psychologists. And then all the clinical psychologists, all the treatment psychologists have abandoned you. They've all left. And that's indicative of the petition to the APA. That's one of the reasons I submitted it to them, developed and submitted it, was to document that you've been abandoned by professional psychology and that you've been given to this experimental approach to service delivery called forensic psychology, and they are the worst imaginable, and no one cares. Their standards are substantially beneath professional standards of practice in clinical psychology and are in violation of multiple ethical code standards and just practice standards generally. That forensic psychology in the family courts, is a failed experiment in service delivery to a vulnerable population. Clinical psychology needs to return to court involved professional practice. In the meantime, though, we have a situation of active child abuse and active spousal abuse that is not being diagnosed or treated or responded to. And when the mental health system fails in accurately diagnosing child abuse and spousal abuse, then the court is unaware that there is spousal abuse and child abuse going on. And so the court cannot act with the clarity that it needs to protect people, to protect the child, and to protect the spouse in that situation. So it's all fundamentally goes to the failure of forensic psychology as an experimental service delivery methodology. No other pathology has their own special psychologist. Not autism, not ADHD, not eating disorders, not substance abuse. No other pathology has their own special psychologist, just you. And it's like separate but equal, but not equal. They are the worst imaginable. They've been given carte blanche to do whatever they want to protect themselves. And there's just simply no standards whatsoever. So, from that perspective, I've developed uh, a number of resources to that may be of assistance to parents in trying to protect their children and to in trying to elevate the standard of practice that they are receiving from their mental health professional. So, I want to talk about that today and talk about what resources are available to parents to potentially um, empower you to protect your children and protect yourself. Starting with my consulting website. So I have a consulting website up. It's a Gold Trees website, and it has three areas: parents, an area for parents, an area for mental health people, an area for attorneys. And starting with the parental page on that, let me just pull that up here. So that if you click on the parents page and then click over to parent resources, that has a number of resources available, handouts and discussions of booklets that are available. First up is a description of the pathology handout. And that's just something you can give to people, teachers, attorneys, anybody you want. This is the pathology we're concerned about. And so you don't necessarily have to describe it. I describe it. Here it is. And the second handout is a risk assessment handout discussing that in all cases of possible child abuse, physical abuse, spousal, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect abuse, or psychological abuse, that a proper risk assessment needs to be conducted in all cases of possible child abuse. That's a duty to protect obligation of all psychologists with all dangerous pathologies. There's three categories of dangerous pathology: suicide, homicide, and abuse. Child abuse, spousal abuse, and elder abuse. Whenever a psychologist encounters a dangerous pathology, we are obligated to make sure a proper risk assessment is conducted, either by ourselves or by someone else. But we cannot simply just walk away from possible suicide or homicide or abuse. We have to do something. That's called our duty to protect obligations. It's a legally obligating obligation. And so that handout describes that obligation to conduct a risk assessment for all forms of possible child abuse. Then there's a handout on my possible telehealth consultation. Now, this is the most effective way to use me if you're thinking about how to bring me into a matter. It's to provide consultation to the other um, psychologists and other mental health people who are involved in the matter. Now, they should be consulting. If you look at, APA Ethics Code on Competence, Standard 2.01, Boundaries of Competence, I think it's numbered, A, B, C, and D, I think, sections that have to do if you're practicing in a new domain, which the assessment of delusional thought disorders would be considered new for all of them, basically. Um, and attachment pathology is also new to them. If you're practicing in that domain without the competence, then you have to take steps to become competent. And one of the suggestions is consultation. So they should be consulting, and I'm available for consulting. And that handout gives you a variety, like a little menu of how to get me involved at various levels of consulting, anywhere from just my booklets that I'll talk about in a second to actually having me in the session while they're doing an assessment through telehealth or doing therapy. I can be in the session through telehealth in any office anywhere on the planet with proper authorization. That's the only thing that's needed, is to get permissions from whoever needs permission, and I can be sitting in the office as a second opinion consultation. So that's the most effective way to use me. The other way I'm currently being used is as a second uh, opinion review of reports from mental health professionals, often forensic custody reports. Um, that's I can potentially help correct situations that are going haywire, maybe put them on the proper path, help educate the judge about the concerns involved, but I can't make a diagnosis based on record review. And that's what we need. We need a diagnosis of what's happening. We need to identify the pathology so we know how to treat it, what the treatment plan to fix it is. Treatment for cancer is different than the treatment for diabetes. The treatment for child abuse by the targeted parent is different than treatment for child abuse by the allied parent. So an accurate diagnosis for which parent is abusing the child, so that we can take the proper steps to protect the child. Um, and so, but that's even if I'm able to put things on a proper path or get in close to that situation, um, we still need the diagnosis. So the it goes back again to the telehealth consultation and getting that accurate diagnosis. So and then I also put up the amicus brief. I wrote an amicus brief one time by invitation. There was an open invitation from the Australian government to comment on this proposed legislation. And so I took that opportunity and wrote an amicus brief to them. It was accepted. I think they put it up on their website or something. But nothing else moved off of that. Australia is kind of locked into parental alienation, so I don't anticipate Australia is going to be moving for a while until they leave the world of parental alienation and reground in established knowledge. Um, but that's available. It offers a broad range description, and I can write those sorts of things to other people, UN, whoever. This is the pathology, and this is what we're concerned about. There's also a diagram for the difference between or the legal healthcare system approach to resolving this. So it's not trying to solve everything in the legal system and bringing over psychologists into no, no, no. Psychologists need to stay doctors over in the healthcare system. And so, whenever there's an attachment pathology in the family courts around child custody, they need to bump it out and get a proper assessment, diagnosis, and treatment plan that then re enters the legal system as evidence again, and the court can make a decision on the treatment plan, the diagnosis and treatment plan. But we need to end the fighting around these children, and if we just return a single diagnosis and treatment plan, a one opinion, the opposing party is going to fight about that. And then, so we got two people who are fighting. Let's get a second opinion on it so that the court gets two psychologists. And we can do that through telehealth. It gets two psychologists saying this is a diagnosis and treatment plan. If opposing party wants to appoint their own, then we get three psychologists doing it. And the court's totally familiar with a three-judge appellate panel, except it's doctors this time, not judges. And we're discussing the pathology in the family. And then once we get the report into the court can do what it decides based on the report of the consulting psychologists who have assessed, diagnosed, and proposed a treatment plan for the pathology in the family. Custody decisions are the court's decision. Custody decisions will hurt somebody. No matter what we decide, somebody's going to be unhappy and hurt by the court's decisions. And so doctors are not allowed to hurt people. We are not in the business of deciding which parent deserves to be a parent. In the absence of child abuse, parents have the right to parent according to their cultural values, personal values, and religious values. So if there's no child abuse, we need to stay out of the situation. In the absence of child abuse, each parent should have as much time and involvement with the child as possible. And so, again, if to restrict either parent's time and involvement with the child in the absence of child abuse would damage that child's attachment bond to that parent, thereby harming the parent and harming the child. And we're not allowed to harm people as doctors do no harm. And so custody decisions are over to the court's decision about whatever factors they need to consider, distance factors or parenting factors or whatever they consider within the court system relative to custody. When it comes into the doctors, the psychologists, our role is to assess, diagnose, and treat pathology. And so we should conduct a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse to the appropriate differential diagnosis for each parent. Is the targeted parent abusing the child somehow, thereby creating the child's attachment pathology towards that parent? Or is the allied parent creating a shared persecutory delusion and factitious false attachment pathology in the child for secondary gain to the parent of manipulating the court and meeting their own personal psychological needs? So the legal system needs to bump it out to the healthcare system. The healthcare system does what it does, pops it back to the legal system. We shouldn't be trying to create psychologists who are mini judges telling the judge how to apportion court custody. It's not a custody decision. It's a child abuse, a child protection issue. We need a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse. So that telehealth consultation handout describes all of that. Australian brief. The final handout on the parent resource section is a handout about psychological control. And it's a bunch of quotes from the literature on psychological control. Stop using the term parental alienation. There's no such thing. And it grounds you in no established knowledge. If you just switch to say, I'm concerned about the psychological control of the child by the other parent, then you're nested within a whole bunch of research around Barber. And just Barber and expands out. But there's a whole page of quotes from the literature about psychological control of the child. That's what the pathology is, right? Say, point to it and say, this is what I'm worried about. And we need to stop fighting around the children. The way we stop fighting is by all applying the best knowledge, the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline that we can all agree on. Okay, if we can't all agree on it, then we shouldn't be using it. We can all agree on Bowlby, we can attachment research. We can all agree on family systems therapy, Mnuchin, Bowen, Haley, Madonna, Satir. We can all agree on personality disorder pathology, Linehan, Beck, Kernberg, Milan. The research, we can all agree on this stuff. So that's the information we should be applying. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. So then on that parent resource section page of my website, I also just kind of describe a little bit several of my booklets. Now, I've generated a set of resources, booklets, and handouts and things because that's what psychologists do. Okay, we generate the information or generate the assessment instruments that we need for the kid in the classroom, for the eating disorder, for whatever we're treating. We develop the assessment and treatment protocols for that pathology. And they're pretty standard within most pathologies. ADHD has a particular type of assessment protocol and a particular type of treatment. Autism has a particular type of assessment protocol and a typical type of treatment. Over in the family courts, we do not have a typical assessment protocol or a typical treatment protocol because there's been no clinical psychologists over here. The forensic people, your special psychologists, do not diagnose and do not treat the pathology they work with. Holy cow. How'd you get so lucky to get somebody who does not identify what the problem is and doesn't fix it? And that's who you must use because they're the only psychologists working in the family courts, or the forensic ones. So you have to use psychologists who do not identify the child abuse and do not identify the spousal abuse and do not fix it. And you are required to use those. That's insane. Okay. But you can't, if for some reason the attorneys that are working out there can't figure out any sort of lawsuit around that kind of professional practice of giving an entire class of people, those parents who are in the family courts and have uh, diminished autonomy in decision making, um, they're giving them a special group of psychologists who specifically don't identify or fix the pathology they work with. And they have to be, I can't figure out why nobody can figure in the legal profession can figure out a challenge to that and say forensic psychology needs to go. It does need to go. Clinical psychology, the APA will not review forensic. We basically abandon you. So you have no choice. So this is going to have to go to an outside and independent review. This is going to have to go to judicial review on malpractice lawsuits, or it's going to have to go to legislative review on the failure of licensing boards to enforce ethical standards, but somebody from the outside, or it's going to have to go to major media review of just exposing the corruption and cover up and the financial exploitation of parents by psychology and the family courts. So, but it's going to have to take an outside people because there's just professional psychology. The APA is just covering up for the unethical practice in forensic psychology. The booklets though that I noted, I've written several booklets to get into that parents can put into people's hands that will be useful. And I work about 2 to 5 years ahead. So I wrote these booklets around 2016, so, and I didn't anticipate COVID. So these booklets are becoming valuable, I think, now. The first one is that I want to highlight is the narcissistic parent. I like this booklet. It's based simply on the quotes from the literature, and then like I have little chapterettes, disregard for truth and authority, and then I have a bunch of quotes from the literature about that. And then basically what I did was wrote the connecting sentences from one quote to the other that puts the topic together. So the triangulation of the child, and then all sorts of quotes about child triangulation. And I wrote this as a guidebook for legal professionals. This is for the GALs. This is for the judges. This is for the attorneys. This is for anybody who wants to become familiar with what we're dealing with in the family courts, a narcissistic parent. And instead of just pontificating my own opinions or in a way that would allow people to assume they're my opinions, I just gave them the direct quotes. This is what we're dealing with. And the two things I want to point out just regarding this. Right at the end, I have a chapterette on child testimony. Children should never testify against a parent. Okay, they shouldn't talk to the judge. They should not be testify. And if one parent asks the child to testify, that's a pathological parent. Boom, right away. So, and that describes that. I also have this up in a PDF format, just up on my Purple Trees website. And then, but I also included an epilogue about the dark triad personality. This is where the dark triad is where we'll be headed in terms of describing personality pathology. It's narcissistic and borderline personality pathology, yes, but more comprehensively, it's what we have in the family courts is the dark triad, vulnerable dark triad, and dark tetrad. And those are malevolent personalities. And that's where we begin to move into the factitious disorder through the Machiavellian manipulation of the court. So now I recommend what I did on the booklets, because I own a publishing house. Did you know that? Yeah, Oak Song Press. I don't see the point in paying a publisher money when they don't do anything for me. So as soon as they start to promote me, then I'll be more than happy to give them publishing rights. Until then, I like control. So I'm a publisher. I have a publishing house, and that one of the advantages of that is I did keep the pricing of these at the lowest possible level I could keep it. So whatever the lowest was that Amazon would let me do, that was the price. So the parents can get these out as easily as possible to people. You can give these to teachers if you want. You can give them to other people if you want, just to educate about the narcissistic parent. But get them into the hands of the legal professionals, the attorneys, the GALs, minors counsel. Oh, God help you if you have a minors counsel. But even judges, if you can get them in the hands of judges or something, but that's a little dicey getting them directly. But this information should be broadly available within the legal system. That's part of my obligation as a psychologist. So if I'm working in the school district and I do a test on and find a kid has a nonverbal learning disability, then I have a little bit of an obligation to educate the teachers in school about what a nonverbal learning disability is, how it's going to show up in the classroom, and things you can do about it. Same thing. If I've got a narcissistic, borderline dark personality parent in the courts, I need to educate the courts a little bit about what that means, what that is, and what that means. And this booklet does that. The other advantage to this, just to me personally, is it acquaints everybody with who I am. And so now, if I'm brought into a case, they go, "Oh, you're Dr. Childress. I've read your booklet or something," which is helpful. Um, then I also wrote a little booklet, The Assessment of Attachment Related Pathology Surrounding Divorce. And those are the gold trees of my consulting website. Okay, so kind of ties it together. This is an important booklet. Okay, so this is an important booklet. This is an important booklet. And the reason is because if I say you're not doing a proper assessment of the pathology, I kind of have an obligation to then come up with what is a proper assessment for the pathology. Put up or shut up. So I put up. Okay. So I have proposed, if you want to know what a proper assessment for this pathology entails, here it is. 50 pages, little booklet. I describe it to you. And one of the things I do with these booklets too is in the beginning, I describe what the pathology is. And so I have another booklet, Contingent Visitation Schedule. And I intentionally described it slightly differently in each one of these booklets. So the introduction section will take a slightly different emphasis on what features I'm talking about with each one. But the assessment protocol, basically 6 sessions. You meet with the allied parent. You meet with the targeted parent. You meet with the child potentially. You meet with the targeted parent and child to see the symptoms on display. And then you meet with the allied parent again. You meet with the targeted parent again. And so it's a very structured approach for collecting information. And in each one of those sessions, we are collecting a different type of information that will all lead to our diagnostic conclusions based on the assessment. One of the reasons I wrote this is so that parents, if you're asking for an assessment and you want to describe what it is, you can give the mental health person this booklet and say, I'd like something like this. Or you can give it to a judge and say, Your Honor, I'd like something like this. It doesn't have to be this. The mental health professional can do whatever they want to assess for possible child abuse. There's a possible shared persecutory delusion. Assess for that however you want, but we need a proper assessment for that and a determination whether or not that's present. I'm offering up one just to stop the argument. Okay, so use this if you want, use something else if you want. It's up to you, but at least we have a baseline that we can begin to operate from and begin to have conversations. And if you disagree with that, you want to modify it, let's have a discussion about it. Let's begin to have those conversations about how we're assessing and treating the pathology. The other booklet of importance is the contingent visitation schedule. Now, this is a strategic family systems intervention that looks like it's a behavioral intervention. It's not a behavioral intervention, but if you are familiar with running a behavior program, a star chart kind of things, or any one of these, applied behavioral analysis, if you know applied behavioral analysis as a psychologist, you can run this because it's the same structure. It's behavioral definitions and then consequences based on whether or not these various criteria are met. But it's actually a strategic family systems intervention that looks at how the symptom confers power in the family. And it's a prescriptive intervention that if you do this, then the symptom's going to disappear because this will affect how the symptom is conferring power. And the moment you change how it's conferring power, then the symptom no longer has this function. And so it'll just drop away. And so that's what this is. The issue with this is you're going to need to find a psychologist who can run it. And that's currently going to be the problem. If we can get DBT therapists over working in the family courts, they can absolutely run this. They absolutely have those skills. So, but we need to get the real psychologists back, people who know behavioral psychology or family systems would be great. Um, the the reason I developed this, the question is, with the diagnosis is child psychological abuse. The treatment for child psychological abuse is always a protective separation from the abusive parent. That's a treatment for all child abuse. We first protect the child. It's called a safety plan before we enter a treatment plan. So if there's child abuse, we first protect the child, we protectively separate the child. Now, I was asked sometimes, is there something we can do other than separating the child from the abusive pathological parent? No, there's not. No, the treatment for child abuse is to separate the child from the abusive parent 100% of the time. Possibly. Possibly. There's possibly something I can do from my bag of psychotherapy to that we won't have to separate the child from a psychologically abusive parent. And so I developed a strategic family systems intervention that if you would do this, you can avoid potentially separating the child from the abusive parent. Essentially, what it does is it makes the time with the abusive parent contingent upon the child's symptoms. So as long as the child's normal range, then whatever the court orders for custody, that's what's maintained. If the child becomes symptomatic, and then the time with the abusive parent is reduced and the time with the targeted healthier parent is increased. When the child returns to normal, the parenting time with the abusive parent goes back to normal. So it's a contingent visitation schedule. I've made it very structured so the court can simply order it and authorize that the treating psychologist or treating mental health person can make the programmatically defined adjustments to the custody schedule based on child symptoms. So it's a very defined approach. So again, this is again what I wrote this so the parents and their attorneys could present to this to the court and say, we'd like this. The problem you're going to find, though, is you won't find anybody to be able to run this unless you find a DBT therapist. And I would suggest that anybody who tries running this get a hold of me and consult with me on how to do it. But so those are the three booklets, three of the booklets that I note, as well as my book Foundations. This describes the pathology in absolute detail. This, I don't really view this as a book yet. I view this as a tool just to stop people arguing. So, what are you saying, Dr. Childress? And here, read my book. This is what the pathology is: family systems, personality disorder, attachment pathology, and integrated across all three. So, and they say, where's the peer-reviewed research? There's no peer-reviewed research. There's plenty of research on attachment, on family systems, on delusional thought disorders, on everything. I don't create knowledge, I apply knowledge. This is a diagnostic treatise on the application of knowledge. And if you want a peer review, read the book, tell me what you think. So far in 8 years, there has not been a single critique of substance relative to what the pathology is that I'm describing. Shared delusional disorder, triangulation, cross-generational coalition. Not a single substantive criticism of that, of attachment-based model of parental alienation. So the reason for that is because the description is 100% accurate and correct. This nails it. This is true and accurate. I predicted, based on this model, I predicted that you're going to see 12 associated clinical signs. Recent research coming out of Dorsey Pruder's custody resolution method is yes, we do. We see at least 5 of those. Most of them had like 9 or above of the 12 ACS. So I made a prediction. The prediction was found. There's only one explanation for that. This is true and accurate. So that's what the pathology is right there. The second resource on my consulting website is for mental health professionals. And the reason I put that up there is to give the mental health professionals a description from me of what the pathology is. And so you'll see the Walters and Friedlander quote up there about a shared delusional disorder, but also to give them the little clinical documents that will help them diagnose and treat the pathology. So I linked to my diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting. Now they can do something else if they want, but this, I'm just trying to be helpful. Okay, with my knowledge, these 3 symptoms will always be present with this pathology and will be present in no other pathology. So if these 3 symptoms are present, then the pathology I describe in Foundations is present. Okay, and so if you want to fight about it, do a mental status exam-a-thon perception if you want. If I'm just trying to be helpful here. So these are showing up in Dorsey's custody resolution method. So she's tagging for these, and she's finding these in the data, which, again, if I make a prediction, these are going to be present, and they're present, then the model that makes the prediction is accurate. And so I think it's kind of a done deal. You want, research will be coming from this. And so, but that speaks also to Dorsey Pruder custody resolution method. I know it's kind of comprehensive and looking at a lot of data, and it can be kind of expensive, yet they do tag for these. And so if these are present, there's only one explanation. And the reason she has to tag for them for you parents and in all the data around is because the mental health people won't simply just do the assessment. I don't see why all mental health people, all forensic psychologists should be conducting or just checking this off. Are these symptoms present? And there's the 12 associated clinical signs on page 3. Are these present? You can disagree with my model or what I write in Foundation. You can disagree with everything about Dr. Childress. Still collect the symptom information and tell us what it is. If these symptoms are present, we have to have an explanation for why. So simply tell us, are these symptoms present or absent? And the forensic mental health people currently in the family courts refuse to tell parents and the court what the symptoms are. They just say, no, I'm not telling you. It's insane. You have the worst psychologists imaginable, and nobody's doing anything about it. There needs to be outside and independent review. So that should just be collected just normally. Then I also include a parenting practices rating scale, a link to that, because the allegation is that the targeted parent is somehow abusing the child, malevolently treating the child in some way. Is that true or false? That's our first differentiation. Is that allegation against the targeted parent that they are malevolently treating their child in some way, is that true or false? Well, conduct an assessment of their parenting. How do you do that? You ask about what kind of interactions they've had with the child. How do they discipline? You ask the child, you ask the allied parent, you ask the targeted parent. How does the targeted parent discipline the child? Then, based on that information, you categorize the parenting of that targeted parent into one of four categories. How? Based on your clinical judgment. Are they abusive range? Are we clearly in the abuse range? That's a level one parent, physically or sexually neglectfully abusing the child. Level two is just under that. They're not quite abusive, but boy, they are really a problem. And so that would be a level two parent. If they are level one or level two, identify what the problem is. That becomes the focus of treatment, is changing their parenting from that abuse range into a more normal range. And then we fix the attachment bond with the child. So we change the parenting and restore the attachment bond. If it's a level one or two, we protect the child from the targeted parent and their abusive parenting. If it's level three, though, that's normal range parenting. That's kind of problematic, but it's normal range. Parents, sometimes spank their child. We might not like spanking, but spanking is considered normal range parenting. And so it's normal range problematic. Now, normal range parenting cannot be producing the symptoms we see here. The normal range parenting produces an insecure attachment. It doesn't produce these symptoms. So if it's level three or level four, which is healthy, normal range parenting, if it's levels three or four, then it's got to be the other parent who's producing the child's pathology at this level of these symptoms. So this is to stop the fighting around the targeted parent. You say the targeted parent is abusing the child. Well, let's document exactly what it is, and let's put it on a treatment plan if it is. If it's not, then it's the other parent. But we need to stop fighting. So just tell us again, what are the features? What are the symptoms we're looking at? So these are simply symptom documentation instruments. You can write it on a napkin if you want. These are not assessment instruments. They simply document what the evidence is so that we're all working with the same words, the same understanding about how bad the targeted parent is, or not bad, and what are the child's symptoms that are being displayed. And we get clarity on that and stop fighting. The third resource is the parent-child relationship rating scale. It's an outcome measure. All treatment should have an outcome measure on it. All treatment for ADHD, for autism, for trauma pathology, for child abuse pathology, when we restore with the abusive parent, we want to monitor the child's symptoms of child abuse to make sure the child abuse isn't resuming. So if we have a physically abusive parent, we want to monitor for like bruises and emotional symptoms and stuff that would indicate the physical abuse has resumed. For psychological child abuse, the symptoms are emotional and relational. So the three symptoms that we're monitoring for with this are on a 1 to 7 scale. It's called a Likert scale, with not at all on one side and a lot on the other, kind of normal range, middle range, in the middle. The three symptoms are affection with the targeted parent. We just want normal range affection. Cooperation, again, we just want normal cooperation. We don't want a wonderful child. It'd be nice, but we don't need one. We just want normal. And social involvement. We don't want the kid hiding out in their room, and we want the kid like normally socially involved, normally affectionate, normally cooperative. As long as that's the case, everything's good. I don't care how pathological the other parent is, because the child is communicating to us through their behavior that no matter what that parent's doing, the child's handling it okay. And that's what we ultimately will be teaching the child, is how to cope and handle the fragility, the vulnerability of their more pathological parent, their more problematic parent. That's going to be mom or dad the rest of their lives. They're going to have to learn to deal with them. But you just need to stay normal range and then we teach them the coping skills to be able to do that. So those resources are available to the mental health people, and a description of the pathology kind of from me to them. And that allows you parents to then just refer your mental health person over to that page on my website. Just one little simple link, and they will get to that mental health resources page. Whether or not they use it, lead a horse to water, who knows? But it's available to you where you don't have to educate the mental health person. Patients should never, ever, ever have to educate a doctor about what the pathology is. Should never happen. Never. You shouldn't have to go into your doctor worried about cancer and have to educate your doctor about what cancer is and how to assess for it. No, the doctor should be educating you about what the nature of your problems are and how to fix them. And so just the whole idea that you parents are having to somehow educate your mental health professionals indicates the substantial deficits in professional practice in the family courts. The parents are educating their professionals about pathology. Yikes, cowabunga. So, yeah, that's a problem. Then the third, if we shift over to the third resource page on my consulting website, is for attorneys. And there's two, as you enter that zone, there's both the attorney resource page and there's a page on custody evaluations. And the custody evaluations page is just some blogs that I've written about the serious methodological problems in custody evaluations. If attorneys want to kind of challenge just the fundamentals of the approach of a child custody evaluation, there's 1,000 ways to challenge the methodology that's being used with that. For example, there's no inter-rater reliability, and we know if there's, for a fact, from psychometrics of assessment, that if an assessment procedure is not reliable, it cannot possibly be valid. We know that. That's psychometrics of assessment. If it's not reliable, it can't possibly be valid. There is no inter-rater reliability on child custody evaluations, meaning it's just an opinion of one particular person. It is not a valid assessment of anything. Okay, it's not reliable. It does not generate the same results from the same information. So it can go wildly different depending upon who is the evaluator. And so they're not valid. The second branch over, though, is to the resource for attorney resource page. And on that, again, I have a number of, I have my Vita and my specialized expertise handout. I have specialized expertise in 6 domains that your attorney can use to qualify me or support my opinions. So I have specialized expertise in diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders from 12 years at UCLA. So all of this is supported by my Vita. I have specialized expertise in child abuse and complex trauma, in attachment pathology, in childhood, in family systems therapy, in factitious disorder imposed on another, and in court-involved custody conflict. So I have 6 relevant domains of specialized expertise supported by my Vita. People should be listening to what I'm telling you. I know what I'm talking about. But then in addition, I have a description of the pathology handout, as well as my telehealth handout, risk assessment handout. There's a handout on improving diagnosis that can address a number of issues raised regarding the treatment plan or the diagnosis. The healthcare legal diagram again. Checklist of applied knowledge is what I use to document compliance with standard 2.04 when I review mental health reports. And so the attorney can look at that. I'm going to be using that every single time to see what applied knowledge was evident in the mental health report. And so attorney can do that, parent can do that, Dorsey can tag for it. The difference is I know what the constructs are, so I can kind of look a little bit broader to see if they're used. But I give five terms that should be evident. And if those terms aren't evident, that discussion is, or that application of knowledge is also not evident. Then I give a reason for supervision checklist because a lot of times, oh my God, the family courts, you guys hand out supervised visitation like candy. I worked foster care. There's a reason we supervise visitation, and that reason is possible child abuse. Is a parent going to beat the child? Is a parent an alcoholic and going to show up drunk at the visitation session? What is the child abuse risk that we're putting supervision on? Over here, it's just absurd. And so when I come onto a case that there's supervision, that's what I'm going to want completed by somebody. So I ask the attorney, please find somebody who can answer this question for me. Why is this parent on supervised visitation? And just check, just tell me why. Then blog on the ethical violations in forensic psychology, just kind of more formally on that. And then a little notation on Jean Mercer and professional concerns surrounding her and practice and boundaries of competence and her testimony, the accuracy of her testimony in the family courts is of concern. And so that's from my website. And so I would recommend that parents just go get familiar with all those resources. And then that gives you a number of ways to help direct, teachers or, your attorney, the guardian ad litem, the involved therapist, the forensic custody evaluator, whoever. And you can sort of direct them to things. And then start putting these booklets in people's hands. Starting with the narcissistic parent, just start handing this out, just like candy again. Just here it is, and this is all quotes from the literature about what the pathology is we're dealing with. And if you want to say to a mental health person, this is what I'd like, please, something like this, and they can consult with me, talk with me about this. That we should be consulting. Standard 3.09. Look it up. Cooperation with other professionals. We should be cooperating with other professionals on this situation. So if you ask them to consult with me, they should kind of cooperate with that. There's no reason not to be cooperative when it's helping their client get the services they need. And in the family courts where everybody fights about everything, we should be cooperating a lot. And second opinion consultation should be the norm over here. We can do it with telehealth consultation. Now, I have some additional booklets and things that I'll just note as I'm closing up here. One of the ones I want to note is the petition to the American Psychological Association. This is a petition signed by 20,000 parents that I hand delivered with two parent advocates directly to the office of the American Psychological Association in Washington, D.C. So I published it as a booklet for a couple of reasons. Everything I publish it makes for easy citation. So you can cite to this now. And so that's just a piece of cake. You don't have to cite to the internet. You can cite to the booklet. And so all the quotes and everything that's in here, the allegations and the recommendations are in the professional literature. Now, the reason I publish is I'm going to cite to this when I ultimately get around to writing my journal articles. I'm going to start the first journal article I write as first author, as a whole sole author likely, will be for an ethics journal. And I'm going to point out that in 2018, 20,000 parents told the APA that there were ethical violations in forensic psychology, and the APA didn't even respond to 20,000. They didn't even give them an answer to the ethical violations that were raised. The first remedy proposed was that the APA issue a press release endorsing standard 2.01 boundaries of competence. That's it. Just support your own ethics code for boundaries of competence would do a world of good in the family courts. But the APA refuses to support its own ethics code. I need to document that. I did document that. Okay. The APA is colluding with the psychological abuse of children. So I started by talking about standard 1.05. This was part of standard 1.05. I took additional steps and they recommended notifying the appropriate people involved. I notified the appropriate people involved. They didn't do anything. So now that kicks it up again. I still have obligations to do something because it's not being properly resolved by notifying the people who should know. Where are the licensing boards in all of this? Why am I out here talking about ethical standards and trying to get up the professionals up to the level of the APA ethics code? Why aren't the licensing board? If the licensing boards did it, boom, you'd have immediately up to the APA ethics level if the licensing board enforced it. The reason is because they're all doing it the same way. And so if they enforce it on that person, they have to enforce it on themselves. And so they would have to sanction themselves for the same ethical violations. So it's a massive cover up within professional psychology. So this is quotable. Another booklet, Professional Consultation. I wrote this one for parents to, if you want to like pre-document that you're going to be going for a board complaint or a malpractice lawsuit against your professional, this is what you give them. This puts them on notice. From me to them, puts them on notice about what the pathology is and what their obligations are relative to that. And then you say, I told them, and they didn't apply any knowledge. They didn't, they don't have the competence in the pathology, and they didn't consult with anybody. They didn't take any steps to acquire the competence. So this is kind of the setup. And if you give them this booklet, I anticipate the mental health person will realize they're being set up, documented in line with a board complaint or a malpractice lawsuit. So they'll drop from the case or they'll create all sorts of problems. And if you do go after your involved mental health professional for ethical violations or malpractice, that potentially will have negative implications around your case because they will use their power against you to retaliate against you. So the mental health people around you are not safe humans. Okay. So they will retaliate against you if you don't comply with what they want you to do, which is basically nothing. So be careful out there. I have a booklet on pilot program for the family courts. This was developed when Houston was developing their program. I used this to support. I write it up a little bit differently this time, potentially, but that's ultimately what needs to happen is we need to get a pilot program for the family courts to develop with the university involvement for evaluation research and to develop the diagnostic assessment protocol and the treatment protocol for this family court pathology, as well as the legal arguments to support treatment. So we got a problem. Let's turn it over to our major universities. And now Dorsey and I can put together a high road or an ABPA high road pilot program for the family courts, where we use an ABPA diagnostic model. We use DBT, court adapted DBT, as the treatment model, and we put Dorsey's high road right in the transition point from any child who's being removed from the care of an abusive parent and placed with the healthier targeted parent. So right at that transition point, Dorsey can apply her high road protocol. She can do half. The university does half. That way, appropriately transfers the protocol into the academic sphere and the healthcare sphere. And Dorsey retains copyright or trademark on the high road and becomes a queen goddess of of trauma recovery and child abuse, which she is. Um, and before I leave, I'm running out of time, but before I leave the issue of resources for you, let me note Dorsey Pruder. She's a family coach and businesswoman. I'm a clinical psychologist. We do different things. However, it is my professional opinion that Miss Pruder is the most um, knowledgeable and capable uh, professional in the family courts in the repair of attachment bonds and the resolution of attachment pathology in custody conflict in the family courts. She is the best, and all of her resources are excellent. They are effective. Some are pricey because they're heavily involved in resources that she has to put into those. The others, I have like a standing recommendation to parents to take the higher purpose parenting course. She trains coaches. I would consider a coach if that's something that you think would be helpful to you. Some of her higher end resources are also effective. That's depending on the situation. But the way I recommend that you enter her world is she has a Facebook group, the Alliance to Solve Parental Alienation. I suggest you join that group and just kind of hang out and listen to what's happening there, become familiar with her approach. I'd also recommend that you Google search on YouTube for videos from Dorsey. Just Google Dorsey Pruder and watch whatever she's given in places. She will be talking in Serbia. I'm going to Serbia, and she and Melanie Greenham will be talking also in Serbia. So those might be places that will be available as well after that presentation. So become familiar with her work. And then once you're kind of familiar with the way she approaches things, then reach out to her people. And typically, I recommend just ask for the higher purpose parenting, and then maybe coaching, and then you can discuss what your needs and situation are. So again, she's a businesswoman and family coach. I'm a clinical psychologist. We do different things, but she is the most experienced professional over here in the recovery of children from complex trauma and child psychological abuse. Um, and she's kind of like my little parakeet in the cage kind of thing, or my benchmark. The moment the AFCC starts listening to Dorsey Pruder, then they've reached reality. Then I know they're okay. Until that point in time, I consider the AFCC like the evil empire of Mordor with a Eye of Sauron and stuff over there. The AFCC is a significantly problematic organization from the mental health side. Um, we'll see how the attorneys handle that situation. Uh, the attorneys, I think, are going to like a treatment oriented approach. The forensic psychologists do not give a treatment oriented approach. So there's going to be like a little divorce within the APA, I think, between the family law attorneys who are going to be looking for treatment and and diagnosis and treatment, and the custody evaluators who do not give that and who are not educating themselves about the nature of the pathology. So, with all of that, happy Sunday to everybody, and good luck out there. You be safe. Smile a lot more for no particular reason. Just smile. It'll improve the situation. And be kind as you approach things. Don't be angry and aggressive. That just gives the pathogen a way of attacking you. Be kind, but be resolute. You're the healthier parent. You're protecting your child. You need support. I'm trying to give you the support. You've got support out of Dorsey as well. So we'll see what we can do going forward. So take care, and we'll talk to you next Sunday. Bye bye.